Shalom. A lot of people think that Christmas is a celebration of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Before we get started, I want you to consider that Satan is the father of lies. You know, he's been deceiving people from the beginning. We know that he started out deceiving Adam and Eve, and he's continued right on through every generation, every people. He's always been planting lies in people's minds and hearts, and he's really good at it. Christmas itself is, in fact, a lie that has been perpetuated by Satan himself. And it is created for the sake of deceiving God's people into practicing idolatry and paganism and worshiping something other than the Creator. Let's start with the fact that Jesus was not born on December 25th. Scriptures don't give us very much detail as to when he was born. We don't have a date, we don't have a year. And the best calculations can only get us within a season. And according to most people, it's probably late summer, early fall. But, you know, there's differences of opinion on when the date might have been. But it's pretty certain that he's not born December 25th. December 25th is a cold month, even in Jerusalem. They're in the northern hemisphere, and so their seasons follow the same way that American seasons do. Winter is in December, January. It's, you know, the cold time of year. December 25th is basically the dead of winter. And we see that according to the Gospels, that shepherds were watching their sheep at night, in the fields at night, during the time when Jesus was born. If you do any research, you can find out that shepherds only watched their sheep at night in the fields during that time in history, during the first century. They only watched their sheep in fields at night during the warm months, which would be March to September, October time frame. And so we're looking at spring, summer, fall, not the middle of winter. And so why was December 25th picked as a date to celebrate the birth of the Messiah? Well, it comes from pagan sun god worship. December 25th, or the winter solstice, has been associated with sun god worship since Genesis. It can be traced all the way back to Nimrod and Tammuz and the cult that they started in Babylon. We see it through the Babylonians, we see it in the Egyptians, we see it in the Sumerians, we see it in the Palestinians, we see it in the Greeks, we see it in the Persians, and then we see it in the Romans. The Romans is really where most of the Christian traditions begin, Christmas traditions begin, because it was the Roman Empire who influenced the Christian church during about the 4th or 5th century is about when Christmas started being celebrated. We know that for the first 300 years of Christianity, there was no Christmas. They didn't celebrate Jesus' birth at all. And in fact, there are early 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century writers, theologians, who have said things against celebrating any kind of date of his birth. So I guess there was, you know, people who thought they should, and, you know, there was a lot of people who said, no, that's a pagan thing, we don't do that. But we see that in, you know, about the 4th or 5th century is when it really was introduced to Christianity. And it was as a result of merging pagan traditions from the pagan worship, sun god worship of Sol Invictus. Sol means sun, and Invictus means unconquerable. And so sun god was named the unconquerable sun, Sol Invictus. And his birthday was December 25th. There was a celebration every year on December 25th in honor of the sun god in the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Catholic Church during the 4th and 5th century wanted to expand their influence and merge with the pagan societies in Rome and kind of have a blended religion, they started accepting a lot of pagan traditions, and Christmas is one of those. They took the Natal's Dies Solis Invictus, the birthday of Sol Invictus, and they renamed it Christmas, Christ's Mass. But we see that it was because of this merging of paganism with Christianity that we come up with this holiday. Absolutely no biblical foundation at all to substantiate the date of December 25th as being his birthday. There's nothing in the Bible to substantiate even celebrating his birthday. We're never ever told anywhere in Scripture to celebrate the birthday of anyone, especially not the Messiah. It is strictly founded in pagan tradition that was adopted by the Catholic Church. You know, we start looking at some of the traditions that we have with celebrating Christmas, and we see that those things are also deeply rooted in paganism. The Christmas tree is, you know, one of the most famous Christmas symbols. Everybody who celebrates Christmas puts a big tree, big evergreen tree in their living room, decorates it with lights and balls and tinsels and decorations and stars and whatnot, all kinds of different decorations, put presents under the tree. We see that this is a tradition that the pagans have done thousands of years before Jesus was ever born. They would do this kind of thing. They would put a tree in their house, and the tree during the winter, and they would, you know, decorate their house with trees and holly and mistletoe and all kinds of greenery, wreaths. The tree and the wreaths are two things deeply rooted pagan influence in fertility. The Christmas tree itself, in pagan tradition, symbolizes an erect male reproductive organ. It represents the male fertility. We also see that the wreath represents the female reproductive organ. You know, once I found that out, I was just appalled and disgusted, and I threw my tree away. I mean, I just got rid of it. I didn't want to have anything to do with that anymore. I used to love Christmas. It was one of my favorite times of year. I would be the first one putting my lights on the house. I would put up my lights, you know, the beginning of November, and I would take them down the end of January, beginning of February. And then when I started doing some of this research and finding out the truth about Christmas, I couldn't believe it. I was just saddened, and I felt such remorse and such grief. You know, I repented, and I prayed that God would forgive me for participating and practicing these pagan traditions. I hate Christmas now. It used to be my favorite time of the year, and now I despise it. And I can't believe that we had been lied to for so long, and so many people have been deceived by it. You know, we move on with Christmas traditions. We see Santa Claus. Santa Claus is this, you know, he's been made out to be this beloved and cherished. People tell, you know, stories about how wonderful he is and how he gives gifts to good boys and girls. And but you know, if you look at it a little closer and you examine the character and nature of Santa Claus, we'll see that he is actually a false god. You know, think about it. Santa Claus is omnipresent. He is able to be all over the world. You know, in one night he travels over the entire world bringing gifts to children. We see that he is all-knowing. That he knows who is good and bad. He knows who's naughty and nice. He knows everything about every person on the world. He's this all-knowing being, and he's eternal. He's been around, according to fable, he's been around forever. If you go back further in history, we'll see that prior to the 19th century, he actually had a helper that tagged along with him. If you were a bad boy or bad girl, he would throw you in the sack and toss you over his shoulder and haul you off and eat you. You know, and it was meant to scare children. You know, you be good and you'll get a gift, but if you be bad, you're going to get hauled off and eaten by Santa's helper. It eventually evolved into nice little friendly elves who make toys. We have a false god, and he has demons working with him. You know, is this something we want to participate in? Can we celebrate Jesus with pagan traditions? Can we celebrate and worship God, the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of creation? Can we worship this one true God in the ways that the pagans worship their gods? We see several times in Scripture where he commands us, do not worship me in the way that the pagans worship their gods. Listen to what God says to Moses. When they make this calf, God speaks to Moses and he says, Moses, go back down the mountain because the people are worshiping other gods. Their desire was to worship the God who rescued them, but they did it wrong. And God said, they are worshiping other gods. The real problem is that it's a mixture. They're mixing, you know, they're not totally rejecting God and turning to idols. What they're doing is they're having this mixed faith, where they are worshiping God, but they're also worshiping with the practices of the pagans and worshiping with idols. And over again, God is saying to them, stop doing these things. I hate these things. But we see that the traditions of men oftentimes get in the way of us keeping the commandments of God. And Jesus himself criticizes the Pharisees for doing this kind of thing. The Pharisees were known to have a lot of traditions that were handed down from the ancestors that they keep. And there's actually today a whole book, or actually a series of books, it's basically an encyclopedia. It's called the Talmud. And it is a whole bunch of rabbinical teachings that have been passed down for generations that are added to the scriptures. And what did God say? He said, do not add to or take away from this book of the law that I'm giving you. But yet we see that the Jews, the Pharisees, the rabbis had this tradition of adding to the scriptures and adding to and making new laws on top of what God had said. And Jesus comes on the scene and he says, you have made null the commandments of God in order to keep your traditions. A lot of people don't know this, but during the Protestant Reformation, the Protestant Reformation leaders, many of the Protestant Reformation leaders, because they were wanting to purge the church of all kinds of paganism, they saw that the Catholic Church was just wicked, and that's why they were breaking off, is because of the paganism and the idolatry and the evil that was taking place in the Catholic Church. And so the Protestant Reformation was an attempt to get away from those pagan things and get back to just a real biblical faith. And in a lot of ways they did do that. But things have been lost even since then, and the church we have today is very different from even the early Protestant Reformation church. But we see that for the first 200 or 300 years of the Protestant Reformation, many of the Protestant Reformation leaders and many of the Protestant Reformation churches rejected Christmas, both Christmas and Easter, because of their deeply pagan roots. And we'll see that even in America, up until the late 1800s, Christmas was outlawed. It wasn't practiced anywhere in America. It wasn't until late 1800s when it started getting practiced in America for the first time. But it wasn't until the early 1900s when Coca-Cola got a hold of Santa Claus and commercialized him and made him who he is today. This jolly fellow in a bright red jacket, riding reindeer and handing out presents. Christmas really took off and had a boom in America and just became the most beloved American holiday. People keep saying we need to put the Christ back in Christmas. But the fact is, Christ was never actually in Christmas. Christmas has been a pagan holiday from its origins. It's been a deception of Satan, and it's been a lie ever since it was ever invented. You can look at even caroling comes from pagan tradition. They would go house to house singing songs. They were running around naked when they did it. Today people dress, wear clothes, but just the tradition of going around caroling house to house comes from pagan tradition. Kissing under the mistletoe, that comes from pagan tradition. They would, whenever they caught a woman under the mistletoe, they would kiss her, and oftentimes they would even have sex with her. It was that kind of just such a sexual, evil, wicked holiday. They would do all kinds of evil things, and it was just very sexual. In many cultures, and the Roman culture especially, the December 25th holiday was a time of lawlessness. Basically, there was no rules. They just did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, however they wanted, to whoever they wanted. Really evil, wicked holiday. It's been cleaned up a lot since then, but its roots are so deeply wicked. Jesus taught that if the root is bad, then the tree is bad. And that a good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. Christmas has bad roots. It produces bad fruits.